Hello everyone, and welcome to Christian Emotional Recovery, the YouTube channel. I don't know why, but when I say that, it reminds me of the movie Spaceballs. I don't know if you ever watched Spaceballs, but it's like, Spaceballs the flamethrower, split Spaceballs the toilet paper. But I love that movie, and it just reminds me of that movie. But I just wanted to say welcome to the YouTube channel if you've never visited before, and I am so glad you're here. And I'm going to do a talk today on something called DARVO, and we'll talk about what DARVO is in just a second. But just really quickly, DARVO, the acronym that DARVO stands for is it's deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender. So we'll talk about that in just a minute and what that is and how manipulators use it and how you can use educating yourself on this strategy to protect yourself if somebody tries to do that. First, I would, if you haven't, click on the subscribe bell and subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can get things here on the YouTube channel that you cannot get anywhere else. You will not find a lot of this, most of this material on the podcast. Most of it. There are a few crossover episodes, but most of it is specialized, more topic-oriented type things, and it's usually shorter. Like the YouTubes tend to be 10 to 20, 25 minutes, and the podcasts tend to be anywhere from 40 minutes to a little over an hour. So hit the subscribe bell. Check out ChristianEmotionalRecovery.com, where you can get a free resource, the Acorn Strategy for Healing Difficult Emotions, an infographic. Check out RachelLeroy.podia.com for the Christian Emotional Recovery store, and if you'd like to check out my writing courses. And check out the Christian Emotional Recovery Facebook group, where you can get weekly memes. I call them Monday memes of encouragement for your healing journey, and also emotional support and community for people like you. Check out the Patreon account. I'll also link that below, where you can support what I'm doing. You can support anywhere from $5 a month on up. And you can also purchase the meditations at the store in Podia if you'd like to support it in that way and get something as well. So I wanted to talk about DARVO, and please forgive me. Today I'm trying something different with my camera angle, and so I've got my laptop. My phone is on a platform on my laptop, and then I'm looking at it below my phone. So if I look down a lot, that's why. And this is an article heavy topic, so bear with me as I'm talking to you about this topic. So this is, I wanted to talk today about something called DARVO. It's a term I only heard about a year ago, and it was like ding, 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 ding. It was another one of those things where you know it happens, but you don't fully understand the mechanics behind it. I don't know if that's the word, the logistics of it. And then it breaks down a strategy that a lot of manipulators, especially narcissists, but a lot of manipulative people will use this strategy, and we even have probably all been guilty of it at some point. But DARVO is an acronym, and it stands for deny, attack, and reverse, victim, and offender. Deny, attack, and reverse, victim, and offender. And there's steps involved in this. And the reason that I'm sharing this acronym with you, and I want to share with you a little bit about how it works and how you can protect yourself from it. We will be talking about an overview of it. We'll go through the acronym and talk about how it works and what people do to manipulate you, break it down a little further. We'll also talk about who is likely to use DARVO and why, and we'll talk about who is most likely to be targeted with the DARVO technique from manipulators and why. We'll also talk about how to recognize DARVO, circumstances when DARVO is most likely to be used, the impacts of DARVO on the victim or the survivor, when DARVO happens at a group level, who is targeted and why, and how to respond to and protect yourself from DARVO. So the whole point of this is I see so much abuse going on and gaslighting going on. And that's not meant to be paranoid and to jump at every time somebody does something that could take the wrong way. You know, we can be the opposite way. We live in a society where everybody is offended by everything. And probably will make somebody mad just by saying this, but yeah, we live in a society where nobody shows anybody any grace. People only look at outcomes and don't look at intention. And we need to go back to looking at people's hearts and giving each other a little grace and overlooking a few things and not being offended by everything. And taking responsibility within our own hearts about how we respond to things. That being said, I just look around me and I see that manipulation and gaslighting is rampant. And it's rampant even within the religious community and the church. There is so much gaslighting and subtle gaslighting. There's so much DARVO even going on in the church. And, I don't want you to be like, you did this to me. I don't want you to use it as a weapon to turn it on somebody else, because then you're just as guilty as they are. What I'm saying is I want you to be able to be aware of this, to be educated, to be able to be empowered, and to be able to set boundaries and protect yourself when you know that's what's going on. So nobody can manipulate you, because nobody has a right to manipulate you and deceive you. And even the Bible speaks against manipulation and deceit. So teaching you about DARVO and protecting yourself, in my opinion, is biblical, because the Bible talks about lies and deceit, and it doesn't speak kindly of them. So one could assume that it's okay to protect yourself from them. So that's what we're going to do today. So what is DARVO? So I've got several sources here, and one of them is Wikipedia. And Wikipedia talks about what DARVO is. It gives you a brief overview and outline, what DARVO is, why you need to know about it, how you can educate yourself about it. And this article talks about that a little bit. So let me read the first two little sections of this particular article in Wikipedia. And it's just called DARVO. And it's deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender is a reaction that perpetrators of wrongdoing, such as sexual offenders, may display in response to being held accountable to their behavior. And that's happening a lot in the church, and that is wrong. It's happening in the Catholic Church, it's happening in the Southern Baptist Church, it's happening in a lot of other churches, and it needs to be called out, and there needs to be accountability for the fact that we are turning the victims into the perpetrators and covering up for the perpetrators. And there's going to be a day of reckoning when God gets a hold of those people. That's all I can say. But it says some researchers indicate that it is a common manipulation strategy of psychological abusers. Sound familiar? And as the acronym suggests, the common steps involved are the abuser denies, D, the abuse ever took place. So this happens when somebody says or does something and you see it and you know it's wrong and you say something, and maybe you even say it lovingly, but then they deny it. But that's just the beginning. You think that's bad? The next part, when confronted with evidence, the abuser then attacks the person that was abused, and or the person or family or friends for attempting to hold the abuser accountable for their actions. And finally, then I'll go to that in a second. So the second step here is that they actually, you can put hard concrete evidence in front of them. You can have a text with their very words out of their mouth, so to speak, or a recording, and they will still deny it. It's insane that they do this. And then what they end up doing is the abuser claims that they are actually the victim in the situation, thus reversing the positions of victim and offender. Somehow you go to somebody about something they've done that's wrong and hurtful, and somehow by the end of the conversation, you're apologizing to them. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, that's what DARVO is. It's a form of gaslighting. And it often involves not just playing the victim, but also victim blaming. We've heard that before, and I'm just going to say it. I think a lot of churches, especially more fundamentalist ones, that's very common. Victim blaming is very common. It's one thing to take accountability for your own actions. It's another thing to victim blame. Those are two different things, okay? So the origins, the acronym, and the analysis is based on the work of a psychologist named Jennifer Freyd, and she wrote about it in 1997. The first stage of DARVO denial involves gaslighting, and this is just her words, Freyd's words. I have observed that actual abusers threaten, bully, and make a nightmare for anyone who holds them accountable or asks them to change their abusive behavior. This happens in court, too. We've seen it. Another example I can think of is R. Kelly. If you watched that explosive interview with him a couple of years ago, he was the victim. He had been done wrong. Somehow 16 and 17-year-old girls were manipulating him. It was just so effed up. But she says this attack, intended to chill and terrify, typically includes threats of lawsuits, overt and covert attacks on the whistleblower's credibility, and so on. The attack will often take the form of focusing on ridiculing the person who attempts to hold the offender accountable. The offender rapidly creates the impression that the abuser is the wronged one, while the victim or concerned observer is the offender. So it's not always somebody who's something wrong has happened. Maybe you see an injustice happening in society and you call it out, you call attention to it, and then somebody does this technique on that person as well. That can happen too. Or maybe they witness an abuse and they report it or say something about it, and that happens. That's very common. And then she says, figure and ground are completely reversed. I'm not sure what that means. The offender is the offense. The offender of the offense, and the person attempting to hold the offender accountable is put on the defense. And that's what DARVO is, and it is absolutely horrible. And I try not to get my emotions involved here, but you can probably hear my emotions here because it just makes me so mad that people do this. So wrong. But then the acronym and how each step works. There's an article from a source called Choosing Therapy, and it's basically, what does DARVO look like in action? So let's talk about DARVO in action and common phrases that indicate DARVO. What are some phrases that people that are doing this strategy on you will use? So you can start to see. Now, that doesn't mean if you hear those phrases that it's automatically DARVO. Okay, always look at the context of the situation, but there's a very good chance that in those cases, that's what's happening, and that can be a red flag, so you're at least alerted to the possibility of it. Don't automatically jump to that conclusion. Continue to observe, use your logic, not your emotion, and observe, okay? What does DARVO look like in action? This is Choosing Therapy. And this is by somebody named Eric Patterson, LPC. And it's reviewed by Heidi Mowad. So what is DARVO in action? So it says, in DARVO, the abusers will deny, minimize, and justify their actions. There is a power in the simplicity of the DARVO scheme. The three-step process can sway personal and public opinion quickly. The accused use DARVO techniques, and it can happen so subtly that many people will miss the warning signs. That's why I'm teaching you about it. Instead, they will fall into the pattern of manipulation where all the evidence is criticized. An abuser may use DARVO in the following ways. Deny. The first step in the process for the abuser is to deny whatever wrongdoing they are accused of, says Choosing Therapy. They will completely refuse that any element of the abuse that happened in any way they are accused, whether the abuse is rape, sexual or physical misconduct, emotional abuse, or any type of problematic behavior. The accuser will deny the report immediately. They will remain steadfast in their accusation. And then it says, depending on the abuse in question, they might say things like, the situation never happened. I never did that. That's a lie. I'm a good person who couldn't engage in that kind of behavior. I'm a friend to women and people know this isn't me. And, it's not that people can't be falsely accused and say those things and they're true, but that's what manipulators say when they're lying too. So at this point, the denial is clear and simple. Talking more only opens the person up to more criticism, so they only present the information in vague and general terms. Interesting, right? Second step, attack. That's the A, attack. Once the denial is established, the accused goes on the offensive. Here, the abuser does everything in their power to attack the other person. One way to achieve this is by questioning their motivation, mental health, and stability, gaslighting, attacking their intelligence, honesty, and morality, and attacking their actions, past and present, also known as slander. And the abuser could attack the victim in countless ways by saying, and here are some phrases, you're crazy, you're a psycho, you're an alcoholic or a drug addict, as if an alcoholic or a drug addict can't be a victim of somebody's abuse, even if they are, or maybe they're lying. You've made these claims before. Oh, gee, maybe because it's true. You asked for this / wanted me to do it. Ugh. And then you've never said no. You never said no. Those are some of the strategies and some of the phrases they'll use when you're accused, especially of specific physical violence acts. And then the victim will never be treated with respect or value, and they will be demeaned and disparaged. Number 3, reverse victim and offender. This is still choosing therapy. Perhaps the most fascinating element of DARVO is the attempt of the perpetrator to switch roles with the victim. It's also the sickest, in my opinion. Rather than accepting responsibility for their actions, they aim to make the original victim into the perpetrator. This reversal is done in many ways depending on the situation and accusation. At times, the attempt seems by lack of outward validity and rationality, but the part seems unimportant. Many aspects of DARVO rely on feelings more than facts. In this situation of an abuser raping someone, he or she, I could say, would say that was actually the victim who was at fault. He would say that she seduced him into having sex, or tried to trap him by getting pregnant, or planned to cry rape all along. In the case of an institutional DARVO involving someone who is being harmed by the police, the officer or department could say the victim actually attacked them first. They acted in self-defense, and the person should have complied to avoid these outcomes. So there's also abuse sometimes from authority figures where this happens as well. So it's not just something that happens in interpersonal relationships. It also happens at a societal level, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So I know this video is a little long, but this is one that I want you to really understand, and understand how it can impact you and impact other people. So that's a little bit about the acronym, how the steps work, and some key phrases to look out for as red flags if somebody is committing DARVO or doing DARVO on you or someone else. You might witness this with somebody else, and you can help that person. It doesn't necessarily mean you should jump in and argue with them in the moment, but it might be something that you can help somebody protect themselves with if you can educate them about this technique as well. So the next one is, who is most likely to be targeted with the DARVO technique and why? And there's an article that is from a website called the Narcissistic Abuse Rehab website. Narcissistic Abuse Rehab website. So who gets targeted for DARVO? For DARVO to occur, it says, a power imbalance must exist. So it's usually a case where somebody has more power. So it might be men and women, and the man obviously has more power in that situation. Or it could be an authority figure, or it could even be a parent and a child. I mean, that happens too. It could be a religious authority figure and somebody in the church. That is very common. It could even be a minor in the church. So there has to be a power imbalance of some kind in most cases. It is most effective when the abuser has more social capital than the survivor. They use it too. Don't think they won't. To me, I'm just going to do a quick aside. That's what makes me so mad about abuse in the church. Somebody is so cowardly that they're not only taking advantage of their power, but they're using it against somebody who's helpless, doing the very opposite of what Jesus taught us to do when it comes to standing up for the disenfranchised and the helpless, the widow and the orphan and the prisoner. We can imply to be the people that are disenfranchised in society, the people that have less power. It's our job to stand up for them and to make sure things like this don't happen. And it says, if the abuser is a member of a dominant group and the survivor is a member of the disenfranchised group, generally the survivor is less likely to be believed. And that's why people don't say anything and just put up with it. People who are likely candidates for DARVO are survivors who confront their abuser, whistleblowers, socially vulnerable individuals or groups. Women are more likely to be targeted for DARVO than men. It's not always women. It can be men, but it tends to be women more. And also other disenfranchised groups that there's so many, I won't even list them all, but it can be based on sexual orientation, it can be based on gender, it can be based on race, it can be based on socioeconomic class. This is not to get political, okay? This is not a political post. This is just factual information about who tends to be targeted, and it does tend to be people who have less power and less credibility in society. Credibility has nothing to do with how credible you actually are, though. That's the thing. It's perceived credibility. And we still have a lot of changes to make in society, and I mean, that's a fact. But so that's a little bit about who's targeted. How do you recognize DARVO based on specific tactics of toxic abuse when somebody does this? There's an article in marriage.com, And there's a part where it says how to recognize DARVO. This is in marriage.com, and it's how to recognize DARVO. So it says 5 strategies, how to recognize DARVO. This is talking about narcissism specifically. You do not have to have narcissism to be a manipulator or to be a toxic person. And there are some narcissists that may have narcissistic tendencies that would not necessarily do this. So you got to look at the situation, but this does specifically target narcissism. So it says, so what are DARVO tactics and how can you recognize them? This is where you can pick up on the red flags without being paranoid and protect yourself and set boundaries and keep a clear mind about the truth of what is actually going on, being fair and objective, okay? So the first one is constant denial. That's a red flag. Denial is a hallmark of the DARVO strategy. If someone denies their behavior anytime you confront them about an issue, you are likely a DARVO in a DARVO relationship. Phrases such as, that never happened, I never said that, are common in DARVO gaslighting. Number 2, deflection. Another common DARVO strategy is the use of deflection. The abuser can avoid taking accountability and for the behavior for which they focus off themselves and deflect it onto someone else, usually the victim. So sometimes they'll deflect it off of you and blame somebody else. So that happens too, so keep that in mind. Minimizing their behavior. DARVO gaslighting often involves some degree of minimization. The perpetrator may admit that there was a fight and that they were physical toward their partner, but they will claim that the victim is blowing things out of proportion. Or I would argue they provoked me is another one. For example, if the perpetrator screams at their partner, calls her names, and damages property in the home, they may say, it wasn't a big deal. We just had a heated argument. That is normal in relationships. Throwing things and breaking them might be common, but it is not normal. Minimizing the behavior leads the victim to believe they were overreacting and the abuse wasn't as bad as they perceived it. That's what I was taught my whole ever-loving life, and it kept me in the dark because I believed it, because that was the narrative I had been told my whole life. I was so conditioned in it, I believed it, and it wasn't true. It just wasn't true. Seemingly forgetful. Another gaslighting tactic used by DARVO relationships is claiming not to remember incidents of abuse. Another one I love is that they change their story. I've had that happen so much. I never said that. That never happened. I'm like, okay. But the abuser may claim they've been forgetful lately or make an excuse such as being under too much stress to remember the details of a specific event. And then the last part, they diminish your credibility. DARVO abusers will also gaslight their victims by attempting to diminish their credibility. For example, if you confront them about something they've done to hurt you, they may accuse you of being too sensitive or always being on their case. That's why I said use balance here, but when you start getting to a healthy balance concept internalized, people will not be able to deceive you like this. You will know, and you won't be questioning yourself and scratching your head. Are they right? Am I too sensitive? Because I still struggle with that some. But I am just going to keep learning about healthy relationships by being in them and by reading about them and by learning about them and learning about these tactics and finding balance by not overreacting and by learning not to take everything personally, because there is a balance. And knowing when I am sensitive because of my own unhealed wounds and being kind and compassionate with myself and working on those wounds and being honest with myself about them, that's all part of this journey. And then it says, if you tell others about the abuser's bad behavior, they will likely tell people that you are crazy or someone is out to get them. And that's the other part of how you can know what DARVO looks like and different ways you can identify it so you can protect yourself. Okay, so recognizing DARVO. Circumstances when DARVO is most likely to be used. Public examples were one that I used was R. Kelly. That one's pretty factual. It's obvious that he was lying. It's obvious that he groomed young girls and then raped them. Because in my opinion, if somebody is not at a certain age and somebody much older than them comes along, I won't get into that, but yeah, he was the perpetrator and he used DARVO all over the place. And guess what? He's rotting in prison now. And maybe I shouldn't say this as a Christian, but I don't care. He belongs there. He attacked, took advantage of, and abused young girls, and even his own wife, he treated her that way. So he's where he belongs. And then another example, this is just my opinion. I know this is controversial, but just to give you an example, Amber Heard and Johnny Depp. Johnny Depp is not a perfect person by any means. He's dysfunctional in a lot of ways, I'm sure. But Amber Heard tried to act like she was the victim, and there was a lot of evidence to the contrary of that. And it backfired on her. And that's just my opinion. I could be wrong, but I have educated myself on this and watched for subtle cues, and that's just what it looked like to me. And that's just a little bit about DARVO in specific cases of it, circumstances when DARVO is likely to be used. So what are impacts of DARVO on the victim, and how can you get your life back if you've dealt with this your whole life or in a long-term relationship? That's a very good question. So also in the marriage.com article, there is a section called How DARVO Affects Relationships in Marriage. But I don't think this is just exclusive to marriage or to romantic relationships. It can be family relationships. It can even be with a boss or somebody in your church or a neighbor. I've had to deal with this kind of stuff with my crazy neighbors across the street. And it just goes on and on. It could be anybody that you interact with on a regular basis, and especially long term. Impacts of DARVO on the victim. I like to use the word survivor, but if you're still in the middle of it, you could consider it yourself a victim. There's also a difference between being a victim of a real situation and playing the victim. The DARVO people play the victim, but somebody who's accusing somebody of something that's validly wrong and they flip it on them, they're playing the victim, but the person that's accusing them is actually a victim. They're not playing a victim. Playing implies you're lying, you're pretending. Being something means it's true. That's the difference. So don't let somebody shame you or manipulate you into not being able to see the difference. And that's another way they can use DARVO on you. If you can keep those two distinguished in factuality, I just made that up, in factuality. So that is a way to help you to be able to protect yourself as well. Let's say, okay. So the effects of DARVO. The impacts of DARVO, I'm back in the Choosing Therapy article, and I'm just going to go straight into it. Here are the effects of the DARVO on the survivor or the victim. DARVO takes a terrible, uncomfortable, or traumatizing event and continues the cycle of abuse. I would argue in some cases the trauma from that is worse than the trauma that was originally experienced from the original offense. So now the person has to deal with the original event and the damaging effects of the DARVO on their mental and physical health. According to Dr. Harsey, somebody that they're talking about, that's talking about this in the article, the intent of DARVO is to silence victims either through confusion, invalidation, or even intimidation. By denying that any mistreatment occurred or downplaying the harm it caused, attacking victims' credibility, and then playing the victim, perpetrators attempt to instill doubt among their victims. Did the abuse really happen in the way that I remember it? Am I just overreacting? Is it actually my fault? Data indicate that people exposed to DARVO during confrontations with their perpetrators report feeling greater self-blame for their wrongdoings they experience. Ultimately, DARVO tries to distort the way the victims think about themselves and the abuse they experience. And then it says, one of the most devastating effects of DARVO is the person doubting their own memory. They may begin to experience confusion surrounding the events and call their recall into question. And then it says, with doubt comes shame, embarrassment, and guilt. They may withdraw from the original claims, or authorities may encourage them to rethink action. And another thing you'll find is when you're with these people and they're actually pleasant, you'll begin to doubt your own reality and think, I thought that they were like this. But what they do is they cycle in and out of these repeated patterns of being nice and then doing all this crap, and then being nice and doing it. It is such a mind screw. And that's why you have to look at it from an overall perspective, a bird's eye view, so to speak. It says one study found that when people confronted their toxic abusers, they were confronted with the perpetrator denying the events, saying the whole situation is a misunderstanding, and telling them they're crazy. About 22% of victims heard an admission of guilt, but that was only temporary, and in many cases, the perpetrator returned to DARVO techniques and denied, minimized and to minimize the events. From my own experience, being around actual narcissists, this happens a lot. You'll get a flash just for a second, oh, maybe I did do that. Or you shouldn't, like, I shouldn't have said or done that. Or they'll see somebody else being victimized and they'll actually have the right perspective about it. And then the next time they've completely switched their view and they're back in complete denial and they're defending abusers and they're defending themselves and they're covering things up and they're denying it. And that's what I see happen a lot around me. That's just my experience. Effects of public opinion. Any level. Okay, so that's a little bit about how it can impact the survivors. There's a lot of psychological impacts, and a lot of them are the same as overall narcissistic abuse. So if you've read or studied about that, then that will give you a lot of clues of the psychological impacts. Now, this video is getting long, so I don't want to get into that forever. But when DARVO happens at a group level, who is targeted and why? That's also something to be aware of, because as there's something called collective grooming tactics, and narcissists will use that too in organizations, in institutions. They might be educational, they might be religious, they might be community, they might be neighborhoods, they might be families, but they can happen. There's also extended family dynamics that might be different than a nuclear family. You might have a functional nuclear family that somehow escaped some of this, and then your extended family's toxic. Or maybe you can see where your toxic nuclear family got it from in the extended family. Or in some cases, it's the other way around. Your nuclear family is unhealthy and your extended family somehow isn't. It's just a combination of a lot of factors. So when it happens, though, at a communal level, a community level, that's something to be aware of, too. And a lot of people don't talk about that, but I think it's important to address it briefly so you can be aware of it. And you might start seeing some things in society that you weren't aware of before. So it says DARVO as a collective grooming tactic, and this is the Narcissistic Abuser Rehab article. And it says DARVO as a collective grooming tactic, the cognitive distortions created by DARVO cultivate an ecosystem of moral corruption. And this happens a lot I'm not saying every church, it happens everywhere, but it's more common than people want to acknowledge in the church and in religious communities. Not just Christian, but all religious communities. It says members of the peer group are encouraged by the narcissist to engage in polarized or black and white thinking. And these days, you've got like two extremes. You've got people over here wanting to challenge and question everything, and you've got the other people over here that do that kind of black and white thinking. And I don't think either extreme is healthy or biblical. That's just, again, my opinion. The group's empathy for the narcissist is weaponized and used to encourage negative biases about the recipient of the abuse. Narcissists, psychopaths, and other manipulators do this in order to ensure that members of the dominant clique become indifferent and callous about the betrayal of the survivor. And a lot of times they become the flying monkeys for the narcissist. So the desensitization of the group opens the door to the objectification of the targeted individual, and once this is accomplished, every kind of violence becomes acceptable. This is what's happening in America now. If Republicans can see Democrats as subhuman, if Democrats can see Republicans as subhuman, it becomes okay to say and do whatever you want or think towards them and about them. And it's not okay. It's not okay. Examples of this can be anti-Semitism, racism, sexism, homophobia, but it can happen either way. Or because somebody is in this group, they're all this way. They're subhuman. And it becomes very easy to dehumanize people. And we have to, as Christians, guard against that. I don't care. That is not Christ-like either way. And I'm guilty of it. I'm very guilty of it. And I've got to work on that. I've been trying to work on it. And I'm going to keep working on it. But it says, in other words, bystanders yield to betrayal blindness in the interest of looking out for themselves and to avoid the loss or pain they might risk in sympathizing with the target. In other words, if you've got a power structure and somebody has the gall to stand up against it because they've been abused and the whole power structure comes down on them, if you stay silent, you're compliant. You're compliant. They assign more value to their relationship with the abuser or the power structure. So it follows that it's in their best interest to empathize with the narcissist and not the survivor. In fact, in many cases, bystanders may stand to gain more social capital if they lend their support to the narcissist. So it's usually a combination of greed for gain and an instinct for self-preservation that eclipses any ethical or moral considerations in the bystander. And then it says, in other words, members of the clique adapt to conflict within the group by turning a blind eye to the harmful behaviors of the narcissist. If you want to see a great example of this in action, check out a podcast put out by Christianity Today called, I think it's called The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. It's something Mars Hill anyway, and I listened to the podcast and it was very interesting. And it's classic, all of this stuff in a church of what can happen when a narcissist, a power-hungry narcissist, runs a church and is non-repentantly denying what they've done wrong, and how it hurts the people who have a heart for God, who love God, and who try to trust, who give their leader the benefit of the doubt, and it is turned on them, and this is what happens to the church. It will break a religious community in half. So if you think it's harmless, think again. It will destroy a community from the inside out if you don't root that rot and that corruption out of a church or any organization. So that's a little bit about DARVO and how it can work in action. So how do you respond to and protect yourself from DARVO? That's a very good question. So let's look at an article called How to Resist DARVO How to Resist DARVO. So the whole point of this, leading up to this, was to be able to recognize it, to see under what circumstances it happens, and then also to see how do you protect yourself when it actually happens to you. What do you do? How do you respond to it? And so let's look at the Choosing Therapy article, How to Respond to DARVO. So in other words, how do you protect yourself? What do you do in this situation? So it talks about how to resist DARVO, and it says, while difficult, resisting or combating DARVO is possible. Methods of resistance include recording the story, getting to a safe space, seeking support, accepting the denial, countering the attack, avoiding role reversal, and ignoring public opinion. Those are some things you can do. Is it easy? No. So it's Dr. Harsey, who was talking in this article earlier, says the first step in resisting is education. That's why I'm making this video for you, because I love you and I'm tired of seeing people having mind games played with them and they don't even know what the heck's going on, and it's not their fault, but you are educated now and you are empowered now and you can protect yourself. Also, just learning about DARVO can mitigate its impact. Research shows that DARVO is less effective in influencing the way people think about victims and perpetrators when they receive a brief DARVO education. So it could actually help you help somebody else as well as yourself. Specifically, when perpetrators use DARVO, people who are educated about this tactic are more likely to believe victims and less likely to believe perpetrators. And it is possible that a DARVO education is also effective for victims themselves. Victims who know about DARVO may be less likely to doubt themselves. Recognize and naming DARVO can be a powerful antidote. We know that anything that causes harm and anything that's hurtful, if we can recognize it and give it a name, it automatically loses some of its power. I'm sorry, I'm trying to talk over my neighbor's dump truck over there. So yeah, they'll leave their car running for like 30 minutes. I'm not kidding. But, and like I said, it is overpoweringly loud. It wouldn't be a big deal if it wasn't, it's one of those sports cars, but it's not just the sports car engine, it's the extra engine, whatever kind that is. So it says, here's some things you can do to protect yourself. Record the story. One of the best things you can do is record and document your experience. Thank God for phones now. We've got ways you can record and take video and all that. Though you may be reeling from the intense emotion of the situation, your memory will be fresh and unbiased by the feedback from others. Track what happened, where it happened, and when it happened. This information will serve as a guide for the future. Refer back to this document often to reaffirm your perspective. Find safety. If you've been abused, there's a good chance the abuse will repeat. You must get yourself and others in your care to a place of safety and security soon as possible. Healing becomes nearly impossible when you're at risk for further abuse. Seek your support. Rallying your friends, family, and other supporters as early as possible is essential. Let them know what happened if it's possible, if they're helpful. If they're going to make it worse, find somebody who is helpful, even if it means going to authorities. There's a lot of There's a lot of 800 numbers and support groups for this kind of stuff that you can also reach out to now as well. So seek your support and tell them what happened, what your fears are, and how they can assist. Remember, there's no shame in being abused or harmed. It happens to the best people in the world. Recognize and counter the attacks. The attacks will follow closely behind the denial. They may play on your insecurities of regrets, but they could be largely untrue and invalid. Remind yourself of this. Remind who you really are and the values you find important. For some, countering the attacks will be the active effort in the media. For others, it will be a plan to commit more energy toward the mental health and self-talk. Number 6, avoid the role reversal. Avoid the role reversal. As they move towards role reversal, do your best to state and restate your experience. Reminding yourself is not to dwell on it or play it up in your mind, but to keep the truth in your mind. I had to do this when I was first aware of emotional abuse, and I would have to remind yourself, no, not this, not this, not this, because you've been brainwashed for so long, you're not going to believe yourself. And so you have to remind yourself over and over and over and over and over the truth of what happened. You do that, like I said, not to replay offense, but to remind yourself of the truth so you know what actually happened. So rather than trying to find new ways to explain the same thing, utilize the broken record technique. Restating the events to others and yourself will help solidify what happened and reduce doubt. Number 7, ignore the public opinion. Of course, this step is easier said than done, yeah. But you must minimize the impact of public opinion, whether it is positive or negative. Avoid social media, turn off notifications, and limit contact with people who are not supporting you fully. And that's just that. Therapy's role in healing from abuse, also seek out a professional. Seek out a therapist, seek out a professional. So that's a little bit about DARVO. Actually, it was a lot. I think that there's a lot more to DARVO than people acknowledge and realize, and that's why I wanted to go into some detail about how to protect yourself, how to empower yourself, how to look out for yourself so nobody can do this to you. This is rampant in interpersonal relationships. It's rampant in society, in institutions, and even in the church, and you need to be aware of it. So protect yourself. And if you see somebody who's being treated this way in the church, you need to go talk to them first and tell them that you see what's going on and let them know that you're there to support them and do what you can to support them. It may not be wise to go talk to the person doing it first. Go talk to the other person because maybe they don't want you involved. Maybe they don't want your help. But what if somebody validating them, even that alone makes a difference? What if they do need support and they need somebody, maybe you've got some of that social capital that they don't have. Use your social capital to help other people. Wherever you have more credibility in society, I believe it's our duty as Christians to help people who are disenfranchised. Now, that doesn't mean like saviorism and patronizing people. You've got to find out what they need and what they want and respect their wishes. You don't force it on them. But if there's any way that you can help somebody who has less social capital than you, less credibility, even if it has nothing to do with who they are as a person, then help those people. Do what you can to help them with their permission, okay? So we talked a little bit about what DARVO is, who's the target of DARVO, how it works, who tends to commit it, so to speak, ways to protect yourself, and how it happens in society. So now you're aware of it. You can empower yourself. You can educate other people about it. I'll put all the articles in the link below, and you can also read those as references and resources if you want to learn more about DARVO. So I've had experiences with DARVO. I understand if you've been through this. I've been through it myself. My whole block to my healing journey for 20 years was DARVO, was a narrative that was spun to me that nothing bad happened to me, that my mental health conditions were inborn, that there was something wrong with me, that I was defective, not that things had happened to me that caused that to make me that way. Now, I'm not saying there aren't inborn mental health issues. There are. And I'm not saying everybody who has them, that's what happened to them. But you need to take inventory of your own life and be honest with yourself and objective. And even somebody you totally trust, maybe a therapist or a minister or a friend, you need to get an objective opinion. Do you think that I'm this way because this happened to me? And just keep in mind, it's just one opinion. But the more perspectives you can put together, you'll start to see the whole puzzle come together, if that makes sense. So just remember, beloved, you're fearfully and wonderfully made, and God loves you. And other people that treat you this way, they are not walking in Christ. They are not doing what Jesus commanded us to do. They are not loving one another. Just remember that. And that doesn't mean you automatically publicly call them out. You have to think about this stuff before you take an action, okay? Educate yourself. Go talk to somebody you trust first. And then if you confront that person, be prepared for the things that can happen. And then be aware of them, okay? And then do all these steps that you need to protect yourself. But that doesn't mean you don't do it. We need to start calling out these things more, actually. And it's just like when you go on the healing journey, it is the most difficult, scary, lonely thing you will ever go through. But it's standing up for truth. And it's the truth, like I said, that will make you mad, and then it will set you free, okay? So, just remember, click on the subscribe bell. Subscribe if you haven't. Check out the Facebook group, Christian Emotional Recovery. All those links are below. If you want to support the podcast, you can go to Patreon and support anywhere from $5 a month on up. And you can check out rachelleroy.com.podia.com for the Christian Emotional Recovery store, and christianemotionalrecovery.com, the website. So it's Christian Emotional Recovery, the website, Spaceballs, the flamethrower. This was a very serious one today, so I wanted to throw a little goofiness in there. So if you've heard any of my podcasts and stuff, you know I'm goofy. But thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for following me. I know this is a long talk. This is the longest YouTube I've ever done. Thank you for listening. And remember, beloveds, God loves you, and you are fearfully and wonderfully made.